Hello and welcome to Strategic News International. I'm Surya Gangadharan. Today I have with me Jeff Smith of the Heritage Foundation in the US. He's a well-known analyst on South Asian affairs, and we are going to talk to him about Narendra Modi's recent visit to the US. Then we also had the Quad meeting in New York, and a couple of other things that we can discuss given our own vantage positions. Jeff Smith, welcome again, and good to be talking to you.
It's good to be with you.
My first question, how do you guys read Narendra Modi's visit to the US? What is the general sense you get? What is the conclusions you've drawn?
I think in general it was received here with great fanfare. I think it was overall a very positive and productive visit. I think Prime Minister Modi really impressed President Trump with the crowd he was able to turn out in Houston. So I think in large part, there were positive optics surrounding his visit, both to Houston and to the UN General Assembly. To the degree that there was any sort of concern, I would say it was probably related to the Kashmir issue. And, you know, we can talk more about that if you like. The level of concern here, the level of attention, the level of sort of public discussion on the issue certainly has not risen to what you've seen in some European countries or some other capitals, certainly like Turkey or Pakistan or China. So I don't want to sort of overplay that aspect of it. But you do have, you know, some human rights groups, some Democratic congressmen who have begun to write letters about it, some murmurs of frustration with the situation there. That's not yet sort of overcome the broad optimism about the strategic partnership, and I certainly don't think it overshadowed the positive aspects of Prime Minister Modi's visit. But you do add that to some of the trade disputes and the sanctions disputes, and it's clear we have a few issues that require management within the partnership. I guess maybe the fact that there was some speculation we would reach at least a modest trade deal during Prime Minister Modi's visit, and the fact that that didn't come to fruition may also be a cause for concern in the weeks moving forward if we don't reach a deal, you know, in the coming days and weeks, which really we expect that to still happen here. So again, a few issues that require some working on, but overall, I would say a very positive visit.
In fact, some of the sense here in India is that the optics apart, there was, again, as you mentioned, a lack of movement on the trade issue. Now, you also mentioned strategic partnership. We are not still clear exactly how this partnership is actually working out. We get a lot of complaints from the US side. There's the usual counters from the Indian side. Exactly how do you guys in think tanks in the US see this?
Well, so I mean, I'm an optimist. I've been working on the India-US relationship for 15 years, and when you don't look at it in a short-term perspective, when you look at the scope of how far we've come over the past 15 years, I think it's very hard not to be optimistic. But I think there are relationship management issues, and I think there are natural and understandable frustrations on both sides, which is, you know, maybe not unexpected in a partnership this broad, two countries with this many interests at stake. So we do have trade and economic grievances that have been, you know, present for many years that do require some resolution, I think, in the short to medium term. They're particularly a priority for this administration, the Trump administration. India is understandably aggrieved by, I think, US, Russia, and Iran sanctions policy. I understand why there are frustrations about that in India. But I don't think any of those should overshadow how much progress we've made, not just over the last 15 years, but just under Prime Minister Modi's first term. All of the foundational military agreements, the 2+2, the easing of arms export controls to ease the transfer of technology and arms to India, moving it to STA1 category. The revival of the Quad, the first try services exercise, the stationing of an Indian attaché at CENTCOM. There are a number of sort of things that have been on the strategic wish list for proponents of Indo-US relations for many years that we've actually been able to accomplish in the last few years that have helped institutionalize this partnership. And I feel like sometimes the good news isn't catchy, it doesn't grab the headlines, it's not what we want to focus on, but it's productive, consequential steps forward in the relationship that I think will have an impact for many years to come, even if they're not always headline grabbing. So I maintain that we are still on a very positive trajectory, but we do need to tend to the relationship. And part of the problem is I think we've had it good for quite some time. You know, we haven't had to deal with challenges. We haven't had to bridge gaps and differences the way we do now, but that's the sign of a maturing partnership.
You mentioned, a whole range of positive developments. Does this issue of strategic autonomy that India keeps talking about, how is it viewed in the US?
Well, I think it's viewed differently depending on whom you're talking to. In general, I think America has accepted the proposition that India wants to maintain its strategic autonomy in its decision-making, in its foreign policy decision-making, that an alliance is not on the table, that India will never be as close to the US as Australia or Japan or the UK. And I think for the most part, everybody here understands that. And I think they accept that it will be a different type of partnership. It won't be a 20th century alliance. Where you begin to run into some friction is when that strategic autonomy works at cross purposes with other US foreign policy priorities. And where we've seen that sort of manifest most clearly, I think, is with Russia. And I've sort of argued against the CATSA type approach of sort of sanctioning India for doing defense deals with Russia. I don't think it's feasible to demand that India cut off all defense ties with Russia. I think that goes against the compact that we formed in our strategic partnership, which said you can maintain your autonomy. But I think we have to be cognizant that for many US policymakers, Russia and Iran are seen as serious challenges for US foreign policy. And I think they're justified in believing so. Russia has done things that worked against US interests. Iran does work against US interests. And so they're stuck in sort of a catch-22. In part, the problem is that we've already sanctioned Iran and Russia to death unilaterally, right? So policymakers have this situation where if they want to continue tightening the noose, they have to go to secondary sanctions, which means they have to force others to stop doing business with Russia and Iran, and that creates the type of problems that happen in India-US relations. The argument that I make is, don't shoot yourself in the foot. Don't hurt your own strategic partnerships in an attempt to harm Russia. There have to be other ways of achieving your foreign policy goals without doing self-harm. So we're trying to sort of navigate those, just like for a long time India had a problem with America's partnership with Pakistan. That created, issues in the relationship. We now have to work through some of our own, but so far I don't think any of them have been insurmountable.
Let's get to the Quad. They had a meeting in New York, and at the ministerial level for the first time.
Yes.
Again, there was no, you would expect a grouping like that to come out with a common statement. It doesn't. Is that an issue? Does it reflect on the Quad as an institution, the way it works?
Well, I think it does reflect the fact that the Quad has been and probably will continue to move at a relatively modest pace. That strategic cooperation among the four countries continues to proceed at a very robust pace, but it's happening at the bilateral and the trilateral levels, not at the Quad. And I think for now, most people in Washington are just fine with that. It's okay for the Quad to be a relatively modest strategic coordination mechanism with great symbolic value, I think. And the fact that it does continue to to move forward, to still be held, not only still be held, but to be elevated at the latest meeting, I think is a positive sign for everyone interested in seeing the Quad continue. We've been calling for a foreign ministers level Quad dialogue for some time at the Heritage Foundation. You know, we're very invested in the Quad. We have a Quad Plus dialogue that we've been running annually since 2013. And so we think there is real value in the Quad, even if it's not at moving forward at a functional level, particularly rapidly. You know, I see the value in the Quad as a coordinating mechanism for now, but as a way to provide a forum for the four countries to increase collaboration at a future date if our threat perceptions vis-a-vis other strategic competitors are to rise. And so long as it continues in form and function, I think it serves a valuable role.
In fact, if one looks below the Quad, all the members there have bilateral or trilateral exercises of one kind or the other. There's intelligence sharing also. So in a sense, we are, working together without actually saying so.
Yeah, each leg of the Quad is being strengthened every year, even if the Quad itself is moving at a modest pace. Yeah, I think that's right. And Rory Medcalf, I've repeated it so many times, but he had the greatest line. You know, he said, the beauty of the Quad is that it made the world safe for trilateralism, right? So with everyone's attention focused on the Quad, it's been easier for the four countries to accelerate strategic cooperation that might have been seen as too sensitive several years ago and is now continuing under the radar.
Was it surprising that India agreed to the ministerial format? Do you believe it has something to do with the manner in which China has been going to town about Kashmir?
Yeah, I certainly think that could be a factor in the decision. I think also the fact that there's a new external affairs minister who may be more invested in the Quad than previous officials were may have also played a role. Yes.
And we are looking at trade also. There's not been much progress on that score. At the think tank level, how do you see this entire problem between us working out? From the information we get here, it's going to be problematic dealing with some of the issues that the US has raised and the concessions that it is seeking.
Well, I'm grateful every day that I don't work on the econ portfolio, because that's much more contentious arena than strategic issues. So I certainly am not an expert on the subject. But, you know, for those of us that have worked on the strategic partnership for many years, there have always been trade grievances present, always. And for the most part, those grievances have been sort of pushed down and subdued in service to the strategic partnership. And so what you've seen is some of these sort of festering irritants or requests, particularly from the US side, that had been suppressed for many years. I think some of those aggrieved parties now feel like they have a sympathetic ear with this White House, and they do, and especially with the USTR. You know, they have been much more aggressively pushing American economic interests in all corners of the world. Obviously, this isn't just an India-specific issue, as everyone knows. But from a non-economic professional, I think the U.S., if you look at the USTR 2019 report, it's actually very comprehensive in laying out what it is it would like to see from India, what it sees as illiberal or restrictive trading and investment practices. And from a non-expert, you know, it does look like the U.S. has a good case to make. It does look like we have legitimate grievances. There are areas where we should be pushing for more market access or more equal treatment. So I don't blame the administration for seeking a deal on these grounds. And I think eventually we do have to get something done so that these issues again can be put on the back burner and we can move forward with the defense and strategic partnership that many of us, you know, find so valuable. But I don't want to get into specific issues on medical stents or access. That's just sort of above my pay grade. I think this administration has been very clear in signaling that it needs some kind of tangible progress to bring back to the White House. And it does seem to me there should be enough room between the two sides to get something done in a reasonable manner. And it's been a little frustrating to see that they haven't been able to achieve that in a year and a half of negotiations.
So, there's been some talk of a free trade area that President Trump had raised some months ago. Is there any this going around?
I find that to be several steps away. First, let us come to an agreement on a much more modest package, and then we can begin talking about more ambitious ideas like a free trade agreement or a free trade area. But no, I haven't heard any further movement on that question.
The Quad is going to be meeting again in the next couple of months, I think in November, for the East Asia Summit. You expect things to move forward there? On what areas? I'm asking you to speculate here.
No, I think we're going to continue to see sort of quiet, closed-door meetings, relatively tame statements issued by each capital. We may eventually see a joint statement because, I've argued before, it's almost an unnecessary sign of disunity when each government issues its own statement that reads almost exact same verbiage as the other statements, right? We're almost making a disagreement when there is none. So you very easily could find this sort of common language that each country holds on the Indo-Pacific, on the importance of freedom of navigation, peaceful dispute settlement. We all share the same vision for connectivity in the region. There's so much agreement between the four countries. It's almost unnecessary for us to keep issuing single statements, but that may be the case. And even if it is, that's okay, in my opinion.
Jaishankar is meeting a cross-section of think tanks in the US. Is he meeting yours also?
Yes, he'll be here on Wednesday. We're hosting a lunch for him that was initially going to be a private roundtable, and now there will be now it is on the record with press attending, and there will probably be an audio recording released. So we are very excited to host Minister Jaishankar. I think I first met him in 2009 or 2010 when he was the ambassador in China. And I've been following him very, very closely ever since. I just find him to be an extremely capable diplomat and a great advocate for India on the world stage.
And generally, what is the thinking among think tanks in your part of the world regarding the current state of the India-US relationship? Is it stable, moving forward, positive?
Still stable, still moving forward, still positive.
Despite Trump.
Still positive, yes. And in fact, I think there were many good things done, particularly in the first year and a half to 2 years of the Trump administration. And we can continue to do good things. You know, we're preparing to have our first ever tri-service military exercise. Yeah. That's a step forward. These are institutionalized forms of cooperation that will endure and continue on beyond any administration. So the mood and the vibe here is still optimistic and still positive, but we're becoming, I think, it's more of a normalized partnership now. You know, after this long honeymoon where it was all good, it was all great, we were so excited, we were in our embrace, we're new lovers, and now we're coming down to the sort of cold, hard reality of being married. And sometimes the day-to-day is difficult. But in the long term, in my opinion, it's all worth it.
Jeff Smith, pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
It's good to be with you. Take care.